What is going on, everybody? Week 7 is officially on us, and there is so many things that have changed. We have key injuries to Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Justin Jefferson, Justin Fields. So it is super important that we get this week right out of any other week, because getting the wrong guys off waivers and missing out on a bunch of good players is really going to be detrimental to you long term. But that is exactly what this video is for. I'm going to give you guys a list of the players that are absolute traps on the waiver wire that you need to be avoiding and letting your other league mates pick up. If you guys do get any kind of good insights from this video and you want to see it every week, make sure to be subscribed, because 90% of the people that watch these videos aren't subscribed, so you might as well hit that button while you guys are here. But you guys know me, I absolutely hate to waste people's time in these videos. So let's get started with the very first player we don't need to be adding off the waiver wire, and this one is probably the most controversial one of the video, and that is Jordan Mason. Now, before you start to hate and spam the comments, a lot of people are coming in and seeing the CMC injury and saying, well, Jordan Mason, he has to be the starting guy. He saw a majority of the snaps last week. We have to fill in for Christian McCaffrey on a good offense, right? But Elijah Mitchell will be the guy you want to have off the waiver wire. If you guys do want a full video on who to actually pick up off of the waiver wire that are good players, I'll have it pinned in this video somewhere. You guys can watch that after this. But a lot of the fantasy football sheep will look at their snap shares in week 6 against the Browns and say, Jordan Mason, he's that guy. Good to go, locked and loaded RB1. And that's just not true. We have to understand that this is the first time Elijah Mitchell has touched the field since his injury in week 3. He was never slated to really get involved. Even when Christian McCaffrey was playing, he wasn't seeing the field, and neither was Jordan Mason. So when Christian McCaffrey did get injured, his snap share was pretty low, as we can see here. But if we look in week 3 alone, he saw 34% snap share and split carries decently with Christian McCaffrey. Jordan Mason just barely made the cut for the 53-man roster in the beginning of the season, and it wasn't like he was some super special athlete coming out of college and had crazy intangibles. When Elijah Mitchell is fully healthy, he will be the RB1 in this situation, but there really is not going to be a true RB1 workhorse like Christian McCaffrey. It's going to be more of a 60-40 split, in my opinion, towards Elijah Mitchell. But at the same time, Christian McCaffrey's injury isn't insane. He's probably going to be out maybe 1 or 2 weeks at most. There are reports saying that he's trending towards suiting up this week already, but there's also a chance that he sits 2 weeks and then waits for after his bye in week 9 and come back in week 10. But I wouldn't be wasting any huge amount of fab or #1 waiver priority on maybe a 1-week rental. Keeping it on the theme of running backs, another guy we don't really need to be adding off the waiver wire is Keaontay Ingram. Earlier in the week, I was talking a little bit about him, pretty much saying that he is the guy we want to have in this backfield. He's going to be the #2 behind James Conner when he is healthy, if you want a handcuff. But after this week's matchup, we've learned the true colors of this backfield, and let me get into it. Obviously, we know when James Conner got first injured, Amari DeMarcado was the clear workhorse running back 1. He was getting crazy usage. But why did that happen, and why did that switch now? The short and anticlimactic answer is that he was the only active running back in that game, so he was the only guy that could be playing. They had Keaontay Ingram, but he was injured. They had Tony Jones, but he was also injured. He was decent in that game, and we were going through and telling you we need to be selling DeMarcado as soon as we can, because this offense just isn't good enough to support an RB1, and even if he so happened to be that, spoiler alert, which he's not, it's not going to be that valuable of a spot. Well, we come into the week 6 matchup they just played against the Rams. DeMarcado had 40% of the snaps, Keaontay Ingram had another 40, and Damian Williams, of all people, saw 20%. Guys, this is a full-blown committee. If you haven't learned by now, committee backfields are not ones we want to be buying in on, especially on subpar offenses, and even more, especially if this committee backfield doesn't have season-long value and is going to go away in a couple weeks when James Conner is healthy again. Tony Jones is also coming back from injury, and he's going to step into the Damian Williams role, and it's just going to be a 3, maybe even 4-man committee, which is crazy to say. Either way, we should not have anything to do with any of the running backs in this Cardinals backfield. I'm not wasting any waiver priority, any fab on another 2-week rental that's going to be in a committee. Again, if we were seeing a committee in a backfield like the Eagles, maybe we could make it work, but the Cardinals are bottom 5 in red zone efficiency, and if you have any of these running backs on your team now, please look to sell high, maybe package them with another guy, just get them off your roster, maybe try to get something from them, but they can be droppable and especially not addable. And there are a lot of do not add running backs on this list, and I'm going to continue it here with our third guy in Antonio Gibson, and I've seen a lot of hype trying to build up for him. For some reason, his stock has slowly been going up over the past few weeks, and as a Commanders fan, I don't understand why this is happening, and let me give my insight on it. He's somehow rostered in almost 50% of leagues, and yeah, he had a decent fantasy number day, but if you look at the actual numbers, it was terrible. But the real reason we don't want to be wasting our time with him is because he has no path to real reps. When we add guys off waivers, we want to be picking up people that have long-term upside, or maybe 1 or 2 week upside that can really get us fantasy points in a clinch, and Antonio Gibson continues to not have any of that. Brian Robinson is the clear RB1 in this backfield. He's getting a majority of the rushing work and a majority of the receiving work, and on top of that, we also see Chris Rodriguez get a decent amount of snaps as well. Rodriguez was missing some time with illness, and he just came back this week and saw 11% of the snaps with 4 carries. Is that going to be detrimental to Brian Robinson? Absolutely not. He's not somebody we we have to worry about. He's more of a thorn in his side, but it is something we have to worry about when looking at Antonio Gibson because he's taking all of that volume from his pool, which is already small enough. And that's going to continue. Chris Rodriguez will probably stay around a 10% snap share the entirety of the season. And honestly, in my mind, I can't hesitate to think that Antonio Gibson will be a workhorse if Brian Robinson were to get injured. On top of that, the Commanders' defense is horrible too. Their secondary and defense on the pass game is absolutely atrocious. They allow 30 points every single time to opposing offenses. And if you're always having to put up points to stay up with your defense giving up points, you're not going to have a super run heavy script, or at least the script they want to run. So that just negates any more rushing upside Antonio Gibson would have, and the Commanders aren't going to be blowing any teams out, so they're not just going to put Antonio Gibson in and rest Brian Robinson. Don't be fooled by Antonio Gibson's touchdown and kind of hype he's getting. Just leave him on the waivers, let other people take him. But staying on the Commanders side, another guy that we don't need to be adding that I've seen more hype about is Curtis Samuel. And this might come as a surprise to some people, but in my entire lifetime as a Commanders fan, we've had big games, we have down games, it's inconsistent, it just is what it is. But that on top of general wide receiver volatility isn't the best mix for Curtis Samuel, and I'll get into it. Look at his chart that pretty much depicts exactly what I'm saying. He's had some big games, he's had some down games, he's had some touchdowns over the past 2 weeks, but if he didn't score those touchdowns, he'd be a single-digit point scorer. No doubt he's been way better than we've expected, but if he's only going to continue seeing a 60% snap share, which he has the entirety of the season and does not look like it's going up, there's not really that much opportunity for him to be on the field, and his routes are going to be limited. It's just not really a super viable spot for him. Until he beats out Jahan Dotson as the wide receiver 2 so he can play in 2 wide receiver sets, he's just not going to be a consistent guy that we can be starting, and that's not going to happen regardless of how bad Jahan Dotson has looked this season. He still dominates in time on the field and routes run. I like Samuel, he's a cool gadget guy, but if I'm trying to buy into him season long, I just don't see where we can do it. He's never going to be a safe or consistent fantasy option unless one of these other wide receivers gets injured. And after all, the reason for our bench spots is to roster guys we think have good upside, and there's no point in just keeping him on our team. But moving on to a tight end we should not be adding. I do not care if he had a good game last week. I really don't. We don't need to be adding Taysom Hill, and I also don't know where the hype for this is coming from, but I guess I do. After the week 6 matchup against the Texans, everybody's calling him a sleeper and his resurgence is back because he ended up seeing his career high in receptions, but that alone should tell you enough, and you probably know where I'm going with this. Saints starting tight end Juwan Johnson was injured this week, and that only led Taysom Hill to see 60% of the snaps regardless of being the starting tight end, but they still got Foster Moreau on this team and Jimmy Graham, people that are going to take snaps even if he continues to miss the rest of the season, which isn't going to happen. It's a 1-week injury. But the reality of it is that he faced an extremely light defense, one of the defenses that allowed the most points to opposing tight ends, and there's absolutely no way he's going to be startable with Juwan Johnson coming back from injury. In my opinion, he's not even a spot start we can pick up for 1 week if there's other injuries on the team. I feel like a lot of people are holding on to his name value that he had a couple years ago, and I do have to admit that he does have one of the easiest tight end schedules for fantasy for the rest of the season. Derek Carr is all sorts of banged up and injured, and that is the only reason he saw the amount of targets and usage he did. Over the past few weeks, Derek Carr has dealt with an AC joint sprain, which usually takes quarterbacks 2 or 4 weeks to get back from, but he's decided just to completely play through it, and it has really tanked his yardage, or at least his efficiency per pass. But since week 4, when his injury did happen, he's averaged one of the lowest yards per pass attempt, which is part of the reason Chris Olave hasn't been producing the regular way he should. And that 10 targets last week means nothing. I can get into that too. That's why Taysom Hill got a little bit more usage. He was using the short check down game. I mean, if Derek Carr can't pass downfield, what else is he supposed to do? But the reason I say the 10 targets for Olave means nothing and the 8 targets for Taysom Hill means nothing is that Derek Carr passed 50 times. When you have 50 pass attempts, 8 targets on those attempts are only a 6% target share. Same thing for Olave. It's not that high of a target share, even though it looks good. Regardless, don't pick up Taysom Hill, even if you think his name value is something. Chris Olave is a good buy low, though, if you do want to grab him. But I also do want to cover Dalvin Cook in this video. His stock has been dropping rapidly, especially now that Breece Hall has been unleashed from his snap count. Because of that, Dalvin Cook's snap share has been going down and down and down over the past few weeks, and it's officially reached the teens. The literal only reason you need to be rostering him is if you have Breece Hall and you want to have that handcuff just in case he gets injured. He's not involved in the receiving game. His rushing opportunities keep decreasing, and all of that is only going to get worse if he's not on the field, obviously. And it's even hard for me to understand because I know we see him on the waivers, we see the name value. I mean, this is Dalvin Cook we're talking about, who was a top 10 running back last year. But things change, and it looks like it's time to completely give up on Dalvin Cook. If you see him on the waivers, don't bother picking him up unless you think your league mates are dumb enough to trade for him if you grab him. But that is going to finish off this video of the players you need to let your league mates grab, and don't waste any of your priority or fab on yourself. I seriously appreciate you guys watching through this video, and I'll see you guys in the mustache video coming tomorrow.